The champagne glass slipped from the billionaire's hand. Christopher Olson had closed billion-dollar deals without flinching. He had crushed competitors, fired executives on a whim, and earned his reputation as the Ice King, the man who owned half of Manhattan skyline but possessed no soul. But now, standing in his own charity gala surrounded by New York's elite, he couldn't breathe. The waitress refilling wine 3 tables away turned her head. Chandelier light caught something at her throat. A delicate silver chain with a crude glass heart pendant. Not diamonds, not gold, just handmade glass, slightly crooked, catching light like broken sky. A glass heart he had made 20 years ago in Riverside Group Home. A heart he'd given to the only girl who made him feel human. The girl he'd promised to marry before the wealthy Olsons adopted him, and he disappeared into prep schools and country clubs, too ashamed to look back. He spent 20 years building an empire, only to lose his breath over a necklace worth nothing and a promise worth everything. She moved between tables with practiced invisibility. Most guests never saw her, but Christopher couldn't look away, because Jada Simmons had kept the necklace, which meant she kept everything. Before we dive into this emotional roller coaster, do me a quick favor. Hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell so you don't miss stories like this. Trust me, by the end of this video, you'll understand why 20 years of silence can shatter in a single moment. Now, let's go back to where it all began. The morning Christopher Olson fired a man without blinking, having no idea his entire world was about to collapse that same night. Let's get into it. The hotel manager's coffee cup shattered against the marble floor of Christopher's office. Michael Preston had worked for Olson Hotels for 8 years. It took Christopher 45 seconds to end his career. The occupancy rate dropped 2%, Christopher said, his voice flat as surgical steel. 2%, Michael. Do you know what that cost me per quarter? Mr. Olson, the renovations caused temporary. I don't pay you to make excuses. I pay you to make money. Christopher pressed the intercom. Security. Escort Mr. Preston out. He has 20 minutes to clear his desk. Michael's face drained of color. Christopher, please. I have a family. You had a job. Christopher turned to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. The conversation was over. He heard Michael leave, heard the door click shut, felt absolutely nothing. This was what separated him from everyone else. The ability to cut without bleeding. To build empires on the bones of people too weak to keep up. His penthouse office sat on the 47th floor of the Grand Celestial, the crown jewel of his hotel empire. From here, he could see Central Park stretched out like a green scar through the concrete jungle. Beautiful, cold, untouchable, just like him. His assistant, Marcus, appeared in the doorway with his tablet. The charity gala is at 7. Your date will meet you in the ballroom. Christopher checked his watch. 90 minutes. Not a second longer. The senator's daughter is very. I don't care who she is. Christopher signed the termination papers for Michael Preston without looking up. 90 minutes of photographs, handshakes, and a check that makes me look generous. Then I leave. Marcus hesitated. You know, most people actually enjoy charity galas. Most people are idiots. Christopher stood, buttoning his Tom Ford jacket. Schedule my physical trainer for 9 p.m. I'll need to work off the champagne. The penthouse apartment above his office was exactly as he designed it. Minimalist, expensive, empty. 16-foot ceilings. Italian marble. Art worth more than most people earn in a lifetime. The cleaning staff came twice daily, but never when he was home. He preferred it that way. No sounds. No presence. No risk of connection. He stood in the shower and let scalding water beat against his shoulders, washing away Michael Preston's desperate face, washing away the vague unease that had been creeping through him lately. The sense that his perfectly controlled life was a tomb he'd built with his own hands. Christopher dressed mechanically. Tuxedo. Rolex. Cufflinks that cost more than his first car. In the mirror, he saw what the world saw. 32 years old, 6'2", the angular features of someone who'd been beautiful once before the cold set in. Ford called him Manhattan's most eligible bachelor. He laughed. Eligible implied he was available. He wasn't available. He was efficient. The gala was a necessary evil. Schmooze the donors, write the check, maintain the reputation. Christopher Olson, the self-made billionaire who gave back. The orphan turned king who never forgot where he came from. Except he had forgotten. He'd spent 20 years actively forgetting, burying Riverside Group home under layers of success until that scared, hungry kid ceased to exist. Marcus met him at the elevator. "Your date is waiting." "And sir?" "Try to smile. You look like you're attending a funeral." Christopher didn't smile. "I am. Mean it." The Grand Celestial's ballroom glittered like the inside of a jewelry box. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto 500 guests in designer gowns and tailored tuxedos. The orchestra played something classical and forgettable. Christopher descended the marble staircase with his date, Amanda, Amber, clinging to his arm, her perfume expensive and suffocating. "This is absolutely stunning," she gushed. "You must be so proud. It's profitable." Christopher scanned the room with the detachment of a general surveying a battlefield. Senators, tech moguls, old money socialites, all here to see and be seen, to write tax-deductible checks while congratulating themselves on caring. He moved through the crowd like a shark through water. Handshake. Smile. "Thank you for coming. Your support means everything." All eyes delivered with perfect sincerity. This was the part of wealth nobody talked about, the performance. The exhausting theater of pretending any of this mattered. Christopher Olson, a silver-haired man in a bow tie, appeared, hand extended. "Your renovations at the Boston property are extraordinary." "Thank you, Senator." Christopher couldn't remember the man's name. "We believe in excellence." The conversation blurred into white noise. Christopher's mind was already calculating his exit. 47 minutes remaining. He could endure 47 minutes of anything. Then she walked past with a tray of champagne flutes. Christopher's sentence died mid-word. The senator was still talking, but the sound faded to nothing because everything faded to nothing except the woman in the black and white catering uniform moving between tables with the grace of someone who'd learned to be invisible. She was black, early 30s, her natural hair pulled back in a neat bun. Beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with the Botoxed, surgically enhanced women surrounding him. Real. That was the word. She looked real. And at her throat, catching the chandelier light, was a silver chain with a glass heart pendant. Christopher's vision tunneled. The ballroom, the guests, the orchestra, his date, the senator, all of it collapsed into that single point of light. That crude, crooked piece of glass he'd made with shaking hands in Riverside's art room because he was 12 years old and wanted to give her something that mattered. "You made this for me?" Jada had whispered, cradling the necklace like it was spun from starlight. "It's not much," Christopher had mumbled, embarrassed by how rough it looked. "The glass cracked when I cooled it too fast." "It's perfect." She'd thrown her arms around him, and for one moment in his worthless life, Christopher had felt like maybe he deserved to exist. "I'll wear it forever." 20 years later, she still was. Christopher's champagne glass slipped from his hand and shattered against marble. His date gasped. The senator stopped talking. Heads turned, but Christopher couldn't move, couldn't breathe, because Jada Simmons had just looked up, and their eyes met across the ballroom. And she smiled. Not a big smile, just a small, sad curve of her lips that said, "I've been waiting for you to notice." The floor tilted beneath Christopher's feet, and 20 years of carefully constructed armor cracked straight down the middle. Jada's hands didn't shake as she poured champagne for table 12. They never shook anymore. She'd learned to be steady the same way. She'd learned to be invisible, through necessity, through survival, through watching Christopher Olson's face on the cover of Forbes while standing in a grocery store checkout line and feeling her heart crack all over again. She'd known it was him immediately. Those eyes, even cold and calculating in the magazine photo, they were still the same storm gray eyes that had looked at her in Riverside like she was the only person in the world who mattered. The billionaire and the orphan. It would have been funny if it didn't hurt so much. Jada had spent 2 years working her way through Olson hotels, Boston, Chicago, back to Manhattan, transferring between properties like a ghost, waiting for him to see her, waiting for any sign that the boy who'd made her a glass heart still existed somewhere inside the Ice King. Tonight, she'd worn the necklace. Not because she believed in fairy tales anymore. She'd stopped believing in those the day Christopher rode away in that Mercedes without looking back, leaving her standing at Riverside's window with tears streaming down her face and a promise turning to ash in her chest. She wore it as a test, as a final, desperate question. Do you remember? Or did you bury me along with everything else from that life? More wine, dear. An older woman in diamonds thrust her glass forward without making eye contact. Jada poured, smiled, moved on. She was furniture to these people. Wallpaper. The help. But not to Christopher. She'd felt his eyes on her from the moment she entered the ballroom, tracking her, following her between tables with an intensity that made her skin prickle. She'd avoided looking directly at him, afraid of what she'd see. Afraid it would be nothing. Afraid it would be everything. Why did I come here? Jada thought as she refilled champagne at table 9. Why did I do this to myself? Because she needed to know, after 20 years of wondering, of seeing his face in business magazines and society pages, of watching him build an empire while she raised her younger brother Marcus in a one-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn. She needed to know if any part of the boy she'd loved had survived. The boy who'd held her hand in the group home's garden and promised they'd run away together. The boy who'd taught himself to melt glass just to make her something beautiful. The boy who'd whispered, "I'll marry you someday, Jada. I swear, money doesn't matter. Nothing matters except you." Then the Olsons came. Wealthy, white, childless, looking for the perfect charity case to complete their perfect life. And Christopher was perfect, smart, handsome, grateful. Everything they wanted in an orphan. Jada had begged him not to go. Not because she didn't want him to have a family, but because she knew. She'd seen it happen before. Kids got adopted by rich families and forgot. They forgot the group home, forgot the shared meals and whispered secrets, forgot the people who loved them when they had nothing. "I won't forget you," Christopher had sworn, crying like she'd never seen him cry. "I'll come back. I promise. We'll get married just like we said." He never came back. Not once in 20 years. No calls. No letters. Nothing. Jada had aged out of foster care at 18, with her 7-year-old brother to raise, and a glass heart necklace that should have been thrown away, but somehow never was. She'd worked 3 jobs, put herself through community college, became invisible in the same hotels Christopher owned, hoping. Always hoping. God, she was pathetic. Jada was pouring wine at table 6 when she heard it, a champagne glass shattering against marble. She looked up instinctively. Christopher stood frozen in the center of the ballroom, surrounded by Manhattan's elite, staring directly at her. His face had gone white. His date was talking, but he wasn't listening. He wasn't seeing anything except Jada and the necklace at her throat. Their eyes met, and Jada smiled. Small, sad, a smile that said, "I see you seeing me. I've always seen you." Christopher looked like he'd been shot. The boy was still in there, buried, suffocating, but still alive. Jada turned away, her heart hammering, and continued pouring champagne. The test was over. She had her answer. Christopher couldn't let her disappear again. Not after 20 years. Not after that smile that said, "I know exactly who you are, Chris. I've always known." He abandoned his date mid-sentence, ignored the senator's confused look, and cut through the crowd like a blade. His assistant Marcus intercepted him near the bar. "Sir, is everything?" The waitress serving section 3. "Who is she?" Marcus blinked. I'd have to check with catering. I want her reassigned to my table. Now, Mr. Olson, that's highly unusual." Christopher turned, and whatever Marcus saw on his face made the words die in his throat. Now, 10 minutes later, Jada appeared at Christopher's table with a wine bottle, her expression perfectly neutral. Professional, as if they were strangers. As if she hadn't just detonated his entire world. Christopher's date, Amanda, he'd finally remembered, was complaining about the salmon. Christopher wasn't listening. He was watching Jada's hands as she poured, watching for any tremor, any sign that she was as affected as he was. Nothing. Steady as stone. "The Riverside collection is exquisite," Christopher said suddenly, his eyes locked on Jada. It wasn't a random comment. It was a grenade. "Have you seen it, Amanda?" Jada's hand jerked. Wine splashed onto the white tablecloth. Not much, just a few drops, but enough. "Oh my God," Amanda gasped. How clumsy. It's fine. Christopher's voice was rough. His eyes never left Jada's face. Some things from Riverside are worth preserving. Wouldn't you say? Jada's jaw tightened. She grabbed a napkin, dabbed at the spill, her movements sharp and controlled. When she spoke, her voice was professionally pleasant. My apologies, sir. I'll be more careful. Sir. She called him sir. Christopher wanted to overturn the table. Instead, he smiled at Amanda. Excuse me a moment. Business call. He found Marcus hovering near the kitchen doors. The waitress. I need her employee file. Marcus's expression shifted to something between concern and confusion. Mr. Olson, I really don't think. I'm not asking. 20 minutes later, Christopher stood in his office staring at a personnel file on his laptop screen. His hands were shaking. Actually shaking. Name, Jada Marie Simmons. Age, 31. Employment start date, February 2024. Transferred from Boston location. Emergency contact, Marcus Simmons' brother, elderly grandmother in Brooklyn requiring full-time care. Education, associate's degree, Borough of Manhattan Community College. Previous employment, 3 hotels before Olson Properties, food service, consistent positive reviews. Marital status, single. Dependents, 1 brother, raised since age 18 after aging out of foster care system. Christopher clicked through to her hiring photo. She looked tired in it, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. But there, even in the low-resolution image, was the necklace at her throat. He opened the security footage archive, started scrolling backward through months of recordings. There, Jada cleaning rooms at the Chicago property. The necklace. Boston, 6 months earlier. The necklace. Every day, every shift. 20 years, and she'd never taken it off. Which meant she'd never forgiven him, or never stopped waiting for him. Christopher didn't know which was worse. He watched current footage from a gala, Jada moving between tables, pouring wine, smiling politely at people who didn't see her. Except now, Christopher saw everything. The way she held herself, the careful distance she maintained. The moment she'd looked at him and smiled like her heart was breaking all over again. She'd known. She'd known who he was from the beginning, had probably known the moment she applied to work at his hotels. This wasn't coincidence. This was intentional. Jada had found him, had been working in his properties for 2 years, and he'd never noticed. He'd walked past her hundreds of times, looked through her like she was glass, while she wore the necklace he'd made and waited. Waited for what? For him to remember? For him to prove he wasn't the monster everyone said he was? Christopher closed the laptop and pressed his palms against his eyes. He was exactly the monster everyone said he was. He'd abandoned her, chosen wealth over the only person who'd ever loved him for himself. Spent 20 years building an empire to fill the hole where his humanity used to be. But she'd kept the necklace. And if there was even a chance, even the smallest, most impossible chance, that forgiveness existed somewhere in her heart, Christopher would burn down everything he'd built to earn it. We're about to dive into the painful flashback that started it all. But first, drop a comment below. Team Jada or Team Christopher? Should she forgive him, or has he waited too long? Let me know what you think, and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss how this unfolds. 20 years ago, Riverside Group home. 13-year-old Christopher sat on his bed with his pathetic duffel bag packed, staring at the social worker's paperwork like it was a death sentence. The Olsons were coming in an hour. Rich people, good people, a real family. Everything he'd dreamed of since the day his mother abandoned him at a gas station. So why did he feel like he was dying? Chris. Jada's voice cracked as she appeared in his doorway. Her eyes were already red. Is it true? They're taking you today. Christopher couldn't look at her. If he looked at her, he'd start crying, and he couldn't cry. Not anymore. Crying was for kids who still believe someone might come save them. Yeah, the Olsons. They're good people. They have a big house in Connecticut. I'll get to go to a real school. That's good. Jada's voice was small. Broken. That's really good, Chris. Yeah. Silence stretched between them like a chasm. Christopher twisted the edge of his blanket, the same threadbare blanket he'd had since he was 7. Everything in this place was old, worn, forgotten, just like the kids. Except Jada had never made him feel forgotten. "You'll forget about me," Jada whispered. "Everyone forgets." "Never." Christopher finally looked up, and the devastation on her face nearly killed him. "I'll never forget you, Jada. I swear." "They all say that." She was crying now, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Everyone who gets adopted says they'll come back, that they'll write, that they'll remember. But they don't. They get their new families and their new lives, and we just disappear." "Not you." Christopher stood, crossed to her, grabbed her hands. They were shaking. His were too. "You'll never disappear. I'll come back. I promise. We'll get married just like we talked about, remember? We'll get a little apartment, and—" "Stop." Jada pulled away. "Don't make promises you can't keep." "I mean it." Christopher's voice cracked, desperation bleeding through. "Money doesn't matter. Nice houses don't matter. You matter. You're the only person who ever—" He couldn't finish. Couldn't say "the only person who ever made me feel like I deserved to exist." Jada touched the glass heart necklace at her throat, the one he'd made for her in art class, burning his fingers on the candle flame because he was clumsy and desperate and wanted to give her something that proved she mattered. "Do you promise?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "Do you really promise you'll come back?" Christopher pulled her into a hug, fierce and tight, trying to memorize everything. The way she smelled like the group home's cheap shampoo, the way she fit against him like they were made from the same broken pieces. "I promise. I'll come back for you. We'll get married. I swear on my life." He meant it. In that moment, he meant it with every atom of his being. Then the Olsons arrived. They were everything he'd imagined. Kind, wealthy, smiling like they'd won the lottery when they looked at him. Mrs. Olson cried and called him handsome. Mr. Olson talked about sailing lessons and private school. They promised him a future, a real life. All he had to do was leave Jada behind. Christopher walked to their Mercedes in a daze. Turned back one last time. Jada stood at the window, one hand pressed against the glass, tears streaming down her face. She was wearing a necklace. The glass heart caught the afternoon light like a tiny, broken promise. "I'll come back," he mouthed. She just shook her head. Slow. Sad. Like she already knew the truth he hadn't admitted yet. The Olsons' world swallowed him whole. Prep school, sailing club, summer homes. They dressed him in Brooks Brothers and taught him which fork to use at dinner parties. They gave him everything, except they never talked about Riverside, never asked about his life before. The Olsons wanted a son, not a charity case. So Christopher learned to bury it. Bury Riverside. Bury the hunger and fear. Bury Jada's face at that window. Bury the promise. At first, he meant to call, meant to write. But weeks became months, and his new life pressed in from all sides, demanding, consuming, reshaping him into someone who fit, someone who belonged, someone who wasn't that scared kid anymore. The glass heart necklace became a memory, then a dream, then nothing at all. By the time Christopher graduated from Yale, he'd convinced himself Riverside never existed, that the boy who made promises in group homes had died the day he rode away in that Mercedes. He built an empire on that grave, and he never looked back. Until tonight, when Jada smiled at him across a ballroom, wearing the promise he'd buried 20 years ago like it still mattered, like he'd never stopped being worth saving. Victoria Ashford had been watching Christopher all night, and she didn't like what she was seeing. She'd positioned herself perfectly within his line of sight, her Valentino gown cut to show just enough, her laugh pitched to carry across the ballroom. Victoria had spent 6 months engineering this introduction through mutual friends, dropping hints about her family's political connections, making herself indispensable. Christopher Olson was the prize, the billionaire bachelor, the self-made king who'd never shown interest in anyone. Until tonight, when he couldn't stop staring at the help. Victoria drained her champagne and stalked across the ballroom, her Louboutins clicking against marble like gunshots. She caught Jada near the kitchen doors, away from the crowd, away from witnesses. "Excuse me." Victoria's voice dripped venom disguised as politeness. "I need to speak with you." Jada turned, her expression professionally neutral. "Is there something wrong with your service, ma'am?" "Oh, the service is fine. Victoria Smaid, Rasor Sarp. But I couldn't help noticing you've been hovering around Mr. Olson's table, staring at him. It's rather inappropriate, don't you think? Something flickered in Jada's eyes. Anger, maybe, or hurt, but her voice stayed steady. I was assigned to that section. If there's a problem, you can speak to the catering manager. The problem, Victoria stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper laced with poison, is that you seem to have forgotten your place. You're here to serve drinks, not to make eyes at men who are so far above you they can't even see you exist. Jada's jaw tightened. I'm doing my job. Are you? Victoria's gaze dropped to the necklace at Jada's throat, and her lip curled. Or are you trying to catch his attention with that pathetic little trinket? Did you think wearing cheap costume jewelry would make you interesting? Make you visible? It's not costume jewelry. Oh, please. Victoria reached out, her manicured fingers closing around the glass heart. This looks like something from a gumball machine. How much did it cost? $5? $10? Don't. Jada's voice went cold. Don't touch it. But Victoria was already lifting it, examining it with theatrical disgust. My God, is this glass? It's not even real. The craftsmanship is abysmal. Look at this crack. You're wearing broken trash to a black tie gala, and you think. Jada grabbed Victoria's wrist. Let it go. The ballroom had started to quiet around them. Heads turning. Conversations dying. Christopher was pushing through the crowd, his face white, but he was too far away. Victoria's eyes narrowed. She'd been embarrassed, touched by the help, in front of everyone. You need to learn your place, Victoria hissed. Then she yanked. The silver chain snapped. The glass heart flew from Victoria's fingers, arcing through the air in a slow-motion trajectory that seemed to last forever. It hit the marble floor with a sound like a gunshot, and shattered. Not completely. The heart cracked into 3 pieces, the blue glass fracturing along the old crack Christopher had made 20 years ago. But it was broken. Irreparably, devastatingly broken. Jada made a sound like she'd been shot. She dropped to her knees, reaching for the pieces with shaking hands. Victoria smoothed her dress, satisfied. Now, maybe you'll remember where you belong. That's when Christopher arrived. Christopher didn't think, didn't calculate, didn't consider the 300 guests watching or the cameras or his reputation or anything except the broken pieces of glass on the marble floor and Jada's devastated face. He shoved past Victoria so hard she stumbled backward into a table. Champagne flutes crashed. Someone gasped. But Christopher was already dropping to his knees beside Jada, his $12,000 tuxedo hitting cold marble, his hands reaching for the fragments of the only real thing he'd ever made. Don't touch it, Jada whispered, tears streaming down her face. It's broken. I know. Christopher's voice cracked. His hands were shaking as he carefully gathered the 3 pieces of blue glass. The heart he'd made with clumsy, 12-year-old fingers. The promise he'd broken. I know. I'm so sorry. The ballroom had gone completely silent. 500 of New York's elite stood frozen, watching the Ice King kneel on the floor beside a waitress, watching him cry over broken glass. Christopher's assistant appeared at his elbow. Sir, we should leave. Christopher didn't look up. Everyone leave. Get out. Mr. Olson. I said get out. His voice echoed through the ballroom, raw and broken, nothing like the cold businessman who'd fired Michael Preston that morning. This was something else, something real and bleeding and desperate. Marcus started ushering guests toward the exits. Confused murmurs. Smartphone cameras flashing. Victoria Ashford standing there with her mouth open, realizing she'd just made a catastrophic mistake. Christopher cupped the broken pieces in his palm like they were made of starlight. He turned to Jada, and when he spoke, his voice carried across the vast ballroom in the terrible silence. This necklace, he said clearly, tears running down his face, is worth more than everything in this room, more than this hotel, more than every property I own, more than every dollar in my account. He looked directly at Victoria, his eyes blazing. Because I made it for the only person who ever loved me when I was nothing. And I spent 20 years pretending she didn't exist because I was a coward. Jada was sobbing now, her hands pressed against her mouth. Christopher held out the broken pieces. I don't know if I can fix this. I don't know if I can fix anything. But I need you to know, I never forgot. Not for one single day. I was just too ashamed to come back. The ballroom was empty now, except for security hovering at the doors. The orchestra had stopped playing. The only sound was Jada's quiet crying and Christopher's ragged breathing. You promised, Jada whispered. You promised you'd come back. I know. You promised we'd get married. I know. Christopher's voice broke completely. I'm so sorry. Jada stood abruptly, unsteady on her feet. She looked at Christopher kneeling there with broken glass in his hands, looked at the empty ballroom, looked at 20 years of pain and waiting and hoping stretched between them like a chasm. I can't do this. She backed away, shaking her head. I can't. I wore that necklace every day for 20 years, Christopher. Every single day. Waiting. Hoping you'd remember. Hoping you'd come back. And you were here. You were right here. You walked past me 100 times and never saw me. Jada. No. She was crying harder now, her professional composure shattered. You don't get to do this. You don't get to ignore me for 20 years and then have a breakdown when someone breaks your guilt totem. That necklace was mine. My hope. My stupid, pathetic hope. And now it's just broken glass. She turned and ran. Christopher tried to stand, tried to follow, but his legs wouldn't work. He knelt there on the marble floor of his own ballroom, holding broken pieces of glass, watching the only thing that ever mattered run away from him. Again, the Brooklyn apartment building looked like it had been old when Christopher was born. Cracked concrete steps, roof-stained brick, a broken intercom that buzzed static when he pressed the button for Unit 4C. He'd had Marcus pull the address from Jada's personnel file. Had driven here himself in the Aston Martin that now looked obscene parked between a dented Honda and a pickup truck with a missing tailgate. Christopher stood on the steps in his ruined tuxedo, still holding the broken necklace pieces wrapped in his pocket square, and realized he had no idea what to say. I'm sorry seemed criminally inadequate. The intercom crackled. Hello. An older woman's voice. Suspicious. I'm looking for Jada Simmons. My name is Christopher Olson. I need to speak with her. Please. Long silence. Then, she doesn't want to see you. I know, but I'm not leaving until she does. Another silence. Then the door buzzed open. Christopher climbed 4 flights of stairs that smelled like cooking spices and old carpet. The door to 4C opened before he could knock. Jada stood there in jeans and a Howard University sweatshirt, her eyes red and swollen, her hair down around her shoulders. She looked younger like this. Vulnerable. Real. Beautiful. What are you doing here? Her voice was flat. Empty. I need to tell you the truth. The truth is you forgot about me. Jada crossed her arms. That's the only truth that matters. I never forgot. Christopher pulled the broken necklace from his pocket. I've had private investigators searching for you for 3 years, Jada. 3 years. I knew where you lived. I knew you worked in my hotels. I knew about your brother, your grandmother, everything. Jada's eyes widened. What? I found you 3 years ago. Saw your name on an employment application at the Boston property. I had Marcus run a background check before I even realized what I was doing. And then I just kept tracking you. Kept tabs. I knew every time you transferred properties. Every shift you worked. I watched security footage of you like a stalker. Then why? Jada's voice broke. Why didn't you say anything? Christopher's hands were shaking. Because I was terrified. Because I'd spent 20 years becoming someone you'd hate. Someone who fires people without blinking. Someone who chose money over the only person who ever he couldn't finish. I was afraid you'd look at me and see exactly what I'd become. A monster. Everything I promised I'd never be. So you just watched me? For 3 years. I know how it sounds. Christopher took a step closer. I know I don't deserve anything from you. Not forgiveness. Not another chance. Nothing. But I need you to know I didn't forget. I buried you because remembering hurt too much. Because every time I thought about that day, about your face at the window, I wanted to his voice cracked. I wanted to burn down everything I'd built and go back. But I couldn't. I'd already chosen. I'd already become this thing that can't feel anything real. Jada was crying again, silently. Why are you here, Christopher? Because tonight, when that woman broke your necklace, something broke in me too. And I realized I've spent 20 years building a tomb. And I don't want to die in it anymore. He held out the broken pieces of glass. I can't fix this. I don't know if I can fix anything. But I'm asking, begging, for a chance to try. To be worthy of the boy you knew. The one who made you this and meant it. Jada stared at the broken glass heart. At Christopher standing in her doorway in a ruined tuxedo, crying like the 13-year-old boy he used to be. Come inside, she whispered. Jada's apartment was tiny. A worn couch, second-hand furniture, photographs on the walls, her younger brother's graduation, her grandmother smiling, a little girl in a group home who'd become a survivor. Real, lived in, nothing like Christopher's sterile penthouse. It was the most beautiful place he'd ever seen. Jada's grandmother sat in a recliner by the window, oxygen tubes in her nose, watching Christopher with sharp, knowing eyes. So you're the boy? Yes, ma'am. Christopher's voice was rough. The one who broke my granddaughter's heart. Yes. The old woman nodded slowly. At least you admit it. Most men lie. Jada sat on the couch, pulling her knees to her chest. Christopher remained standing, afraid to presume, afraid to get too close and shatter whatever fragile chance he'd been given. I need you to understand something, Jada said quietly. I didn't track you down for money. I'm not some gold digger who saw you on Forbes and decided to cash in. I know. I saw your face on that magazine in a grocery store checkout line 5 years ago. And my first thought wasn't he's rich. It was he made it. He survived. She wiped her eyes. I was proud of you, Chris. Even though you left me. Even though it killed me. I was proud. Christopher's throat closed up. But then I saw how they described you. The Ice King. Ruthless. Heartless. And I wondered if the boy I knew still existed anywhere inside that person. So I applied to your hotels. Transferred between properties. Wore the necklace every single day, hoping, her voice broke, hoping you'd see me and remember, that you'd prove you weren't the monster they said you were. I am that monster. Are you? Jada looked at him with those same kind eyes from 20 years ago. Because a monster wouldn't be standing in my apartment right now, crying. The monster wouldn't have dropped to his knees in front of 300 people. The monster wouldn't have spent 3 years watching me on security cameras because he was too afraid to say hello. Christopher sat down slowly on the opposite end of the couch. I don't know how to be him anymore. The boy who made you that necklace. I've spent so long being someone else. Then learn. Jada's voice was soft but firm. You learn to be the Ice King. You can learn to be Chris again. Christopher looked down at his hands. At the Rolex that cost more than most people's cars. At the Hermes belt, the Tom Ford tuxedo, all the armor he'd spent 20 years building. He took off the watch, set on the coffee table, then the belt, the cufflinks, the jacket, piece by piece, stripping away every symbol of wealth until he was just a man in a wrinkled shirt, sitting in a tiny Brooklyn apartment, looking at the only person who'd ever seen him as something worth saving. What can I do? His voice was barely a whisper. Tell me what to do, Jada. I'll do anything. Jada reached across the couch, took his hand. Her palm was warm against his, callous from work, real in a way nothing in his life had been real for 20 years. Just be Chris again, she said. The real one. The boy who made me a glass heart because he wanted to give me something beautiful. That's all I ever wanted. Christopher laced his fingers through hers and felt something crack in his chest. Not breaking, but opening. Like light flooding into a tomb he'd been buried in so long he'd forgotten what breathing felt like. I'll make you a new necklace, he whispered. I'll learn how to do it right this time. No cracks. No mistakes. I like the cracks. Jada smiled through her tears. They made it honest. 3 months later, Christopher stood in Riverside Group Home's art room, teaching 12-year-old kids how to melt glass over candles. The same room where he'd burned his fingers making a heart for a girl who made him believe in tomorrow. Jada worked in the room next door, helping teenagers navigate college applications. Her brother Marcus ran the after-school program. They'd turned Christopher's guilt into purpose, his money into hope, his empire into something that actually mattered. And every day, Jada wore a new necklace, a glass heart Christopher had made with his own hands, clumsy and imperfect, cracked in all the same places. Because some promises, however late, however broken, can still be kept. Because the boy who promised forever at 13 had finally learned what forever meant. And because Christopher Olson had finally come home. If this story touched your heart, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss our next powerful story. Drop a comment telling me, do you believe people can truly change? Should Jada have forgiven Christopher? I read every single comment. And if you love this story, check out the video I'm putting in the description next. It's another incredible tale of love, loss, and redemption you won't want to miss. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.